in lieu of the news that just came out that Republicans have now officially won the executive, Donald Trump, the judicial, and the legislature, Congress. Everything is Republican for at least 2 years. And a big question that comes to me, a lot of people ask me is, the Supreme Court in itself is something that's very mystical, that's very fantasy kind of thing. It's this pseudo weird thing that doesn't operate by the same, rules as any other governing body in this country. And a lot of people ask me, well, how did it get so conservative? And so this is going to be a little story time as to basically, a quick crash course 101 on how one the Supreme Court works and how it became super conservative, and that um, you know that is all due to one man by the name of Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader out of Kentucky. He's a very fascinating and interesting person. But so I guess I'll start with, for those of you who don't know, the way you appoint someone to the Supreme Court is that you know in the Constitution, the only thing Congress can do about the Supreme Court is change their appellate jurisdiction, which is change the topics they can hear on appeals, and they can also set up lower courts. They can also add more justices to the Supreme Court, and that's about it. So basically, theoretically, Congress could add 20 justices to the Supreme Court. They could have a Supreme Court that only deals with, civil cases. They could have a Supreme Court only between state to state cases. They could do a lot of stuff that, other countries do, but they just chose not to. And the numbers have gone up and down over the years, but nine, I think, is the number that it's going to stick with for the foreseeable future. But yeah, so the president always, anytime there's a vacancy, the president appoints a Supreme Court justice. There's a lot of ways you can go about it. You can use the Republican ideological method, like Trump. So let's say if you want to, overturn Roe versus Wade, you're going to appoint someone who's going to vote the way you want to vote. There's also the Democrat, you know, the partisan model, in the sense where the loyalist model, where you appoint people who have been good to you. I always think about maybe a Merrick Garland appointment or Ruth Bader Ginsburg appointment, things about merit. But once you get appointed to the Supreme Court, it's usually not usually, it has to be confirmed and voted on by a simple majority in the Senate. And for thousands, not thousands, for a long time, it worked. There was no weird puffery going on, maybe some, here and there late night appointments or increasing the size. But in terms of, usually a justice who got nominated would, serve um, without, worry, without, oh, is the Senate going to approve me, this or that. That was until Robert Bork. So Robert Bork was appointed by Ronald Reagan in the 80s, and he was just a very, very staunch conservative, probably more staunch than anyone has ever seen, in the sense where he only looked at the words Constitution. He was a literalist. He was a textualist. Very fascinating guy. And one of the questions were to Robert Bork that will always hit with me. It was the very last question. It was, why do you want to be on the Supreme Court? And Justice Robert, or nominee at the time, Robert Bork, said it would be an intellectual feast. And that ran the newspapers, that went crazy, and eventually they couldn't get him nominated. The Senate couldn't confirm him. And why Mitch McConnell comes into the picture is then Mitch McConnell comes up to a podium before he has his turkey neck, and he says, you know what, this is vicious. The Democrat Party, they should be ashamed for doing this. This is too political. The court shouldn't be political. And he kind of gave like a pseudo warning that, hey, the next time the ball is in your court and you want to nominate a liberal justice, see what happens. And that's exactly what Mitch McConnell did. So um, then you have the Thurgood Marshall appointment, the first black justice. I believe he passes away during his time on the court. Either that or he retires, but I believe he dies, according to my knowledge. Um, so that happens, and then you have George H.W. Bush, Papa Bush, He nominates Clarence Thomas, the infamous Clarence Thomas, and with Clarence Thomas, it was actually led by Joe Biden, the questioning and the hearings, the Senate hearings, and you know, Clarence Thomas made a very profound point. He was talking about a high-tech lynching, and from my understanding, the best of my knowledge, to break it down in layman's terms, he was like to these Democrats, this all-white male panel, saying, you hate me, just because I'm one of the few black men who are liberal, or excuse me, who are conservative and who doesn't go with the grain, and you don't care about civil rights, you only care about black folks who are in line with your ideals. He said something along those lines. He said in a much more, profound, guttural, punching, academic sort of language, but that's what my interpretation of was. Eventually they folded because there's no way you can get back after that, and Clarence Thomas was nominated and approved. So fast forward to Obama's presidency. Right now the Supreme Court is, right now in the terms of during Obama's presidency, it was iffy, in terms of the sway. But he wanted to nominate Merrick Garland, who was, a very decorated justice. He served on the D.C. Appellate Court, and he was ready to go. I watched Merrick Garland's speech after getting nominated. He's in tears, saying this is the most, um, you know, the biggest achievement of his life, and he's so grateful and yada yada. But here comes our boy Mitch McConnell again, once again, and he says, you know what? We're not going to confirm this person because, you know, the presidency, the election is just 1 year away, and we have to wait to see who the next president is, and then we'll allow that to happen. He said, let the voters decide. And he stuck it, and he made sure he's very brute to every single Republican senator. Don't let this happen. Don't let the votes. Just don't do anything. Don't even take on the case. Don't even hear anything. Just stay put. And it worked. And then now you have Donald Trump. And, he lost the election in 2020, but Ruth Bader Ginsburg dies. And, she says, according to sources, her dying breath, or her dying wish, excuse me, is the idea that um, she wants to wait for the election to happen first, and then elect and appoint a new justice. Of course, that didn't happen, and that's where you have Amy Coney Barrett nominated to the Supreme Court. Within that lame duck period of the sense where Donald Trump lost the election, but he still nominated Amy Coney Barrett, which which was incredible. It was just, the way Mitch McConnell said, you know what, we have to wait a year before, Merrick Garland could, reasonably, hear within the Senate versus Amy Coney Barrett getting nominated like that and approved like that, like super quickly. It's just fascinating stuff. The politics of the Supreme Court, and especially how Mitch McConnell defined how the Supreme Court operates and functions. It makes me think now that, in the future, how long can the Senate hold off? If the Senate is blue and the president is red, how long can the Senate wait it out, and vice versa? Like, could you wait it out for 3 years? Is that even possible? We don't know yet. And Trump Truth Socialed, I guess, or I think he put it on X or Twitter, whatever. But he made a statement about, whoever becomes a Senate majority leader now has to utilize the recess appointments, in the sense where if Congress is in if Congress is in recess, then it is 100% possible for the president to appoint a bunch of cabinet members, bureaucracies, and judicial members, because who's there to confirm if they're on recess? And George Bush Jr. actually pioneered, not he didn't pioneer it, but he made effective use of it in terms of modern presidencies. But I'm so curious as to see how this plays out. Recently, Sonia Sotomayor has been reported to have been dealing with health complications. I don't know if Clarence Thomas I know Samuel Alito is reported not to give up his seat or retire within the next 4 years. I'm not sure about Clarence Thomas, but it's very political now, and it's just something so fascinating that the Supreme Court ultimately, you know, you could have, Joe Biden winning the presidency, the the House, the Senate all flip blue, but if that Supreme Court still stays red, you can still overturn landmark decisions like Roe v. Wade. And I'm not getting into the politics of whether I agree with Roe v. Wade or not. I'm just saying people need to understand that the Supreme Court is the most powerful branch in government, in my opinion, just because of the longevity and just because of the unchecked power. There's not really much checks you can put on the Supreme Court. But the only thing that, in my opinion, that stops the Supreme Court from being some sort of you know dictatorship or oligarchy of nines, you know, grand masters is just simply the idea that they have no basis of enforcement. They can issue opinions all they want, but it's up to the executive to enforce that said law. Most 9 out of 10 times, the president will comply, or the legislator will comply, or the states will comply. But there have been a few instances, the most famous I can think of is when the Indian Removal Act was deemed unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. Andrew Jackson just went right away with it. He didn't give a shit. And, the Trail of Tears did ensue accordingly. So the Supreme Court, they have the power to issue, opinions after opinions after opinions unchecked and by themselves. But, you know, if they have to also rely on the will of the president to enforce it. With that being said, you know, the Supreme Court is very, very powerful, and I urge people who are not as into politics as me, but are interested in, being civically engaged, to also look at the docket and what's going through the federal circuits to keep up, because that's where the real magic happens in a lot of these instances. And yeah, with that being said, thank you for watching. I know this is a little long video, 12 minutes. Yeah, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy your day, and I'll see you tomorrow.